Welcome to Total Network Operations, the show dedicated to all of you who are committed to delivering all the packets all the time. I'm your host, Scott Robon, and I'm just going to get right into today's episode. I want to welcome a really good friend, a really talented friend, Senad Palislamovic, who I've known for 20 plus years. We've bounced into each other at different companies and have kept in touch no matter who's giving us our paycheck these days. But Senad, welcome. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Glad to be here. I love your podcast. And as you said, no matter what, where, and how, we figure out a way to connect. So glad to be here.
Yep. Let's start at the beginning. What got you into networking? What was your career path like? How did you get into this business? What's your superhero origin story?
That's a good one. So I started with the CS. I actually declared CS as my major, and then I started taking C++ classes, and I was like, man, this is horrible. I couldn't find myself into it. It was way too abstract, too far away from reality. And then when I took Java, it was easier because you could see it. It was more realistic. But still, by that time, I already developed love for networking. So that was it. And then I think there's definitely something more to share there. So after I moved to networking, it was more of the network admin. So I don't know if you remember roles. Network admin roles was back in 2000s. So I started as a Unix AIX Sybase admin.
Wow.
For like 30% of my time, and then Windows admin for about 70% of my time. And then I was doing that on Windows NT. And then Windows 2000 comes along, and upgrade totally changed the Windows registry settings. All the menus were different. UI was totally different. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this for a living. I don't want to relearn every single thing every couple of years. It's just a waste of my time. So that's when I shifted the gears and I said, let me look at something that, I'll learn once and it can stay with me for a while. So this is when I moved to pure networking, specifically switching and routing, because protocols, they wouldn't change as often. So you wouldn't have to relearn things over and over. It's sort of additive learning. You just, compound, and more you work, more you learn, and it stays with you. And then eventually, as I took my degree, telecom, signaling protocols, connectivity just suited me better than coding. So that's how I get there.
Very good. Well, you've been through an interesting career progression since there. You've been a TAC engineer to a consulting resident engineer, moving into customer-facing roles, and then back on the customer side in an operational role. That's not a typical progression. What's your take us through that story arc a little bit?
Okay, this is a long one. So I mean, there was a true network job before TAC, right? So actually, I was an operations guy. I used to run Weber State's network. So when I
University in Utah,
Weber State University in Utah, Ogden, Utah, like 30 miles north from Salt Lake City. Yep. So I got a privilege actually to run entire campus and WAN stack entirely end to end. So back 2002 Salt Lake Olympic Games, we got all new Cisco 6500s, 3500 gear from SLOC, which is Salt Lake Olympic Committee, for very cheap. And I got to be the guy who redesigned the entire infrastructure, like upgrade from, I think we had like Avaya, Kajun switches, P550s, P330s, or something like that.
Wow.
And then I got to work on all of it. So even like multi-homing of the WAN circuits to our transit providers. I still remember Cisco wait command, like wait attribute, which is locally significant and influences BGP next hop selection algorithm.
Right.
So I worked on that. It was good, but then inevitable happened. I got bored. Weber State network was too small for me. I just had 2 BGP exits, receive 1 default route. So I got the opportunity to join Juniper TAC. And that was it. All my BGP studies, I got to use it. When you move to TAC, I think, there's I think it was the best move I ever made. There's routing, and then there's routing. And then and Juniper Gig was derouting. One day you was troubleshooting L3 VPNs of Verizon network. Next day, it's messaging multicast problems. Then it's a
Yep.
Bloomberg multicast. So all of it was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then I think effectively that led me to consulting, to design, to architecture. And then there's another pivot that I made that it was, even though I was designing networks, I had an itch for knowing what internet is because I still
Sure.
like, it's just a route, but what is actually internet? So just because of that itch, I actually moved to AT&T account. So I had to go work for a provider to understand the internet, the peering, and everything else. So
Sure.
it was long road. Now, how did I get to be a tech sales leader and the operations? Um, you remember Mike Loomis?
I absolutely do. Yep.
So when Loomis says, let's go do it, you go do it. So I don't know what he saw in me, but he said, come and run. There was a Noir startup and he was building the team and said, hey, I want you to run my technical org. I was like, okay, I'll come with you. So I embarked that, and the rest is history when it comes to leadership. He moved me to, management director roles and everything else. And then I learned that management is purely a psychology game. It's like, how you get people to do what you want them to do. It's like coaching, like parenting, which I fail miserably at, but somehow I'm still okay manager. I think I was lucky enough to change a lot of managers in my career. So I learned a lot from each of them.
Sure.
Sometimes what to do, but a lot of times what not to do.
Not to
So it's
do.
like,
Yep.
okay, don't make this mistake, right? So, all of it led me to now run NVIDIA Global Network.
Yeah.
I don't think it's much different than previous roles, except and I draw all from all of my experiences and
Sure.
making them useful in my current role. Um, so only difference is now it's my network. It's not someone
Right.
else's network, and
Right.
that's what changes the game. But net, similar problems, if you would.
Sure. But the technologies have changed, and you've managed a couple different technology pivots. And let me just call out that move to Nuage, right? Where you were, you know, that was this, cloud orchestration era for networking, which I think probably really stretched you, grew you, and taught you from a tech perspective, beyond, what standard, you know, industrial strength BGP looked like.
100%. So Nuage Gig was phenomenal. Why? Because it drew all of the things that I knew as a sysadmin. Remember, I started career as a network admin, and so
Right.
now with the Nuage network overlays, you had to look at, okay, how do we bring network interface closer to the server and make it automatic? So it was phenomenal experience from technology perspective, understanding the backends of the applications, time series databases at that time that we used in the entire cluster and whatnot. But in the same token, drawing you closer to the application development and then also being part of the startup. And that
Right.
changes the game, right? When you're a
Right.
startup,
Yeah.
your velocity of execution, the way you deliver features, how you go after the customers, it's totally different ball game. And I loved it. It was and to work. I mean, Nuage was amazing. Like Dimitri was a game changer. I don't know if you remember Dimitri. I mean, his even today, I think in network automation, what Dimitri built is like a god box, if you want to call it that way.
Right, right. Well, we'll hit the network automation topic pretty soon here. Let's just talk about the recent shift from, you've got this long, incremental growing progression, knowing what your customers deal with, for operational responsibility for a network, and you've willingly moved back into a role where you now have, as you said, your network and operational responsibility, and that's like perfect for this audience, right? Total network operations. What what drew you back into, the burden that is, right? You've got, if there's an issue, it's not a pager anymore, but you know
That's
when
right.
we got coffee and we got together, when you sneakily were almost dropped me off at LaGuardia a few weeks ago, hey, let me grab my laptop in case I need it, right? You're back in that seat. So what drew you back? What was the draw for you to take that on?
Makes sense. Makes sense. So by the way, it's not pager anymore, but it's pager duty.
There you go. Yep. Yep.
There's an app that's called pager duty and does the exact same thing. So
Exactly.
you're 100% correct. It's operational role. I think it was knack for doing something more.
Sure.
Maybe it's ego, to be honest. Not sure. I think, as you know me, like I'm pretty technical. I like to stay involved.
Yeah.
I was always building and employing stuff with my customers for my customers. But
Yeah.
I think the thing is like I never built it for myself. And I think from that perspective, no matter who my customer is, whether it's, I'm not going to name the names, but like Morgan Stanley, Bloomberg, Bank of America, whoever it is, AT&T, right?
Yeah.
You're doing something for somebody else, and it's their pride. It's not yours.
Sure.
I think it's that owning of your own network that drove me back into it. I think it's ego. I think it's a freedom to exercise any means necessary, any way you can solve the problem because it's your own network, your own problem, where whichever customer if you treat them as a customers, you're working within the box. You're confounded to
Right.
specific things, whether it's a mindset, whether it's a tooling, whatever it is. Now it's
Yeah.
mine. I
Yeah.
feel it's mine. So I think, all of these combined together, total freedom from defining the problem statement to the actual solution because it's my network. I
Yeah.
would probably say
No,
that's what drove me there.
I get that completely. I do think, knowing a little bit about you and your kind of your thirst and hunger for knowledge, let's address it directly. You also in this role have the opportunity to get exposed to a lot of cutting edge technology around artificial intelligence and how that can impact network automation. So why don't you take us there, that other things you get to learn about and how you're applying that to how you operate your network.
So when it comes to automation, automation is very loaded topic, right?
That's right.
There's an automation and there's automation. I typically use a phrase. So if you think about it, right, you and I come from the same frame company, same frame of mind.
Sure.
Do you consider PCE controller network automation? Maybe you
In a
should.
sense,
It
yes.
automated,
In a
right?
sense, yes. Protocol behaviors are actually forms of automation. I include that in the definition. Yep.
100%. So that's why
Yep.
I say, automation. But if you talk about like the actual, virtual stack, which we all solved at some point of time, I think that was phenomenal. I mean, I mentioned earlier, Dimitri and Nuaj.
Mm,
And I mean, Dimitri, man, he's genius of geniuses, right? If you remember, I don't know if you do VSD. To me, it's still like a god box, a flying network served on a platter. It
right.
was Nirvana state of network, truly, because you got like a virtual machine or a Docker pops up, and as they are spinning up, your OVS entry gets decreated with the proper next hop to
Right.
be used. And the moment virtual machine state disappears, Docker is removed, the OVS state disappears, BGP withdraws all its routes. That's
Right.
like a perfect automation. You can't think of any better, right? Um, so, I think, I've done a lot of automation in my life. NSP, you work closely with NSP.
Yep.
A lot of L3 VPN services, site to site, drag and drop. All of these are sort of vendor based automations. And I think now I do a lot of network deployments, so data center automation, DC builds, spine leaves, Ansible playbooks, your typical standard toolkit that you would do.
Sure.
So, what are the problems now? Human in the loop, taking errors out, fat fingering, time to execute, how long it takes you to do the job of like 400 switches in a cluster. All these things, we should evolve toward different way of solving the problem. So this is where I think, especially when the AI comes, there's a way to leverage what's available on the market today from the AI toolkit to not just automate as we have done in the past with
Hmm.
Ansible or Python libraries like Paramiko and stuff like that, to actually go and do more. I think we are at the right time in the market to expose all of it.
So what does more look like? Like what are concrete things you want to see done beyond the stuff that's in your toolkit already?
So if you think about it, the problem with the AI is very simple, right? Things that are good enough, and what can you do with the things that are good enough versus perfect. So things that you can work when they're good enough, like alarms and logs and things like this, it's a perfect time to actually add AI to the ecosystem, because it doesn't have to be 100% perfect. It just helps you do things in a faster pace. So correlate alarms, go
Sure.
to logs. I don't know if you remember, again, I started like seriously in attack, and a
Right.
big part of attack was actually going line by line through the log and trying to figure out exactly what took place before something else, what triggered. So the do's from the
Right.
log itself, right? So
Sure. Yeah.
now you can
But
outsource that
show
to
log pipe to grep is your friend. Remember.
100%, 100%. And then you grep and grep and grep, and you keep grepping things that matter,
Right.
right? Except now I can go to LLM and say, hey, tell me about and what
That's
you're
right.
seeing over here,
Yep.
and grep for me. So,
Super grep.
so
Yeah.
100%. So there's a piece that gets solved in the logs itself, so troubleshooting. But then on the other hand, there's a lot of things that you can do when it comes to network provisioning. And this is where accuracy is needed, right? Because
Sure.
to provision, you have to be 100% accurate. And for this, we can involve RAGs into the pipeline to solve this problem, to maintain consistency. I think there's more to come during your next NAF. This is a teaser there. So we'll
Sure.
see
Sure.
if the
Yep.
speech gets accepted. I'll be able to dig much deeper into it.
Very, very good. I think there's a lot of interesting things that are being submitted for November 25 AutoCon 4. And I can't wait. Yours being among them. Like we'll put them through the process and we see what makes the agenda. But yes, there's and there we're seeing hints of what's going on with developments in MCP, what's happening with increased use of agents, agent to agent interactions. That's going to be fascinating. Um, I do want to poke on the quality of the data problem, right? So you going through logs, that's one thing. Um, we have logs on many devices that we might need to correlate. We might even want to be looking at other sources of log info, maybe security info, maybe optical system info, right? But not all that data is usually useful. And from our previous conversations about data science and now data engineering, what do you think the challenges are there in network operations related activities in particular?
So you bring up a very good point, which is a hygiene around data. And now being an end user, I totally see the problem itself.
Sure.
It's all over the place. There's no consistency, and there's it just if you think about where in network engineering came from, how we did things in the past, and how we real I mean, think about it, right? Even when you were configuring routers, did you really care about description on the interface, back in the day?
No,
Yeah, and
hardly
not really,
ever.
right? Yeah,
Hardly ever.
but now the description is more important than anything else,
Sure.
because it gives you metadata that you can derive something out of the description. Very
Right.
important field, right?
Yep.
Then as you're automating, right? If you're using something like NetBox, and there's so many fields that you have to populate
Sure.
before you deploy something, how many fields are mandatory versus not, right? So this is where, as data hygiene comes important. So I think I don't know if you ever taken like HR courses, or if you're like a bad driver like I am, and I think you had a chance to sit with me, right?
I was,
To be
if
honest,
anything, you went really slow across Manhattan, but that wasn't your
oh,
fault. So,
so you know what? You know why that is? Because I had to take a lot of driving improvement courses, man,
okay.
to
All right.
reduce my points on a driver license,
It
and
worked. It worked.
they've
Yeah.
gotten really smart, right? Because now the way they do it is, before you could just let it play and you can do something else while it's
Right.
playing. Now
Right.
actually UI is engaging, and you have to click on 30 things on the same window
Sure.
before you can move forward,
Yeah.
right? That's how they force you. So similarly, you hit the point, right? The quality of the data. So we have to fix it, So to me, the way we're doing it for me and my team is it's a forcing function. We are
Right.
forcing team to make sure that everything they put in that box is 100% accurate, and you
Okay.
cannot go to the next window until you have filled up all the prerequisites for it. So going forward, we make sure that the data is accurate, and then we have separate projects internally that we work on that potentially could fix all the data that is not there. It hasn't been, when it comes to asset management, right? How can you improve it? But
Sure.
net of it, as you outlined, uh, I think we as network engineers haven't taught it in that way, but now going forward, we need to, especially as we automate things. You mentioned machine learning, data science. We have to think as data scientists, and anything you do in data science, data is your bread and butter, and it has to be accurate. So everything that you do and it revolves around your work is around accuracy, and
Right.
that's the name of the game, I think.
I think, I've come across a couple friends and colleagues talking about data engineering as well. And like the data engineers actually doing more of the work than data scientists actually do in terms of enforcing hygiene and structure around data. I think that example of
100%.
making sure source of truth is populated with 100% accurate information is absolutely the right place to start. Have you found yourself enforcing any other policies or procedures to maintain data hygiene, or using automations to make sure that people aren't making up names for interfaces for entities to actually make sure it gets done in a programmatic way?
100%. So again, go back to network automation, right? One way is if you do it manually, you force people to fill in things properly. Other ways, as you automate, so let's say you have a box. I'm sure that everybody has either got to that point or is working toward a model where entire network infrastructure is automated. So if your network infrastructure is automated, you would typically have a model in a backend. I'm not talking about AI model. I'm talking about the data model and how
Right.
you
Yep.
structure your configs. So you have a model in the backend that derives your configs and fills all the boxes. So if you go to your Juniper stanza, all the elements underneath within the stanza, all of these boxes get populated by the system itself that
Sure.
picks up values as variables, and there's only a specific set of data points that come in as a value within the variables, which means there's no room for error. So
Yep.
as we as an industry evolve toward automating our network deployment infrastructure, so machine is actually deploying it, it's writing the configs and everything else, this by default ensures that your data is first accurate, second there's no missing data whatsoever, and then because those two match, then you can do more with the data itself.
Yeah, that's eternal vigilance, right? You always got to be making sure, if garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you're not throwing in garbage, hopefully you're not getting garbage out. Let's pivot to everything that's happening from a capacity and just rapid growth in networking for AI. And you've got this very unique opportunity where you have this incredibly strong IP background, and I know you've dived in on what does it mean to use this for connecting clusters. I know you probably have some responsibility for InfiniBand. And let me just be super clear. This is not a which technology is better than the other conversation. This is an agnostic. It exists. It's part of an operational environment, and you've got to deal with it. How has spinning up on IP and Ethernet in clusters and InfiniBand, have you had any aha moments or really interesting, things that really drove ideas home for you here?
It was like you said, it's phenomenal actually.
Yeah.
I'm very glad to have this job today where it's like a true balance of your typical TCP, UDP, like applications that you're working on. In one piece is a
Right.
network, and then you separately have NVMe and RDMA stuff that you will have to work on and work jointly, and sometimes independently, sometimes all together, depending what the application is.
Sure.
So I think I would probably say, what drew me there is a passion. I remember this is why I dropped out of CS41 classes, right? I didn't like data structures,
Sure.
and I swapped them for telecom engineering.
But you
So
just told me data models were important for templatizing configurations, Senad. So maybe you've come
that is
around on that
correct.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. 20 years later,
Ah.
that's why we have gray hairs, right? So I'm still passionate, and I think when it comes to like just AI in general and AI for networking or networking for AI, I would probably say that coming up to speed there from whoever So for those who are not as privileged as I am to directly work on the AI clusters, right? And you want to just learn about it, I think YouTube is your friend. There's tons of videos out there
Yeah.
that I've used in the past that helps you get up to speed with the AI architectures. I think there's a guy named Jack or Jay from OCI, and
Okay.
he has a lot of videos
Okay.
on or how he scaled for AI workloads in the back end.
Sure.
So that's definitely one way to do it. In terms of the Spectrum and IB, they're to me they're like two twins. Except
Okay.
one is brown and the other one is blonde, and they're both of your kids, and you have to love them both. One
Sure.
approaches things in a distributed state machine fashion, right?
Right.
Using
Yep.
all sorts of BGP hacks and QoS on steroids like DCQCN. And the other one is, now I got it. It's all in my brain. I just create an X top for everyone. Like, you remember credits and grants in
Yep.
T640's backplane?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So that's what your InfiniBand is. I have it all in my brain and I just orchestrate from the top.
There's
So
got to be a place for the plane to land before you let it take off, right? Yeah.
100%, right?
Yeah.
So they both work. One is just click and it works. Other ones you have to do a bunch of things to make it happen. I say the only thing I'd say, like, if you're dealing with things like Spectrum or Ethernet based, like anything else in the Ethernet, it's different. It's because it's this distributed state machine.
Right.
You gotta know your QoS. This is like QoS on steroids, right?
Sure.
And if you look at the QoS on steroids, it's like tightly coupled with your control plane and with your training control plane. So one thing to note here is, I don't know if you came across or studied nickel.
A little bit. Yep.
So nickel is your complex problem statement.
Yep.
So if you want to learn ins and outs of troubleshooting AI clusters, you have to know nickel like TCP UDP.
Okay.
So if you look at for example, in your previous world, in when you run I don't know. I actually taken CS4700, which was TCP UDP Stevens' book,
Right.
and then you had to take Wireshark and you understand TCP states.
Sure. Yep.
So now that translates is you understanding nickel and it's open source, and you understand nickel traces. So you have to know what all reduce is, what the broadcast is, what all gather, what reduce scatter, what these messages mean to the traffic, and the way traffic is going to lay out across GPUs, and then how is that going to impact your entire infrastructure back to back. Those are things that probably want to pay attention to.
You just demystified a whole bunch of stuff there, right? And it's like whenever you're learning a new language, right? You start with the language and you're always looking at how these languages connect to what's existing for you. To your comment on using YouTube, man, that's exactly how I started learning about RDMA and other pieces of the cluster ecosystem, and like getting the concept that remote direct memory access, number one, is an oxymoron, but it shows you the stringency of the requirements, right? Every GPU in that cluster has memory soldered right next to it, but I want the memory of that GPU and that GPU and that GPU to look like it's direct to me. And that means the network has to be extremely performant, extremely low latency, extremely low loss. And so I'm going to develop a bunch of constructs to help accomplish that very coordinated, orchestration of cranking models through iterations across a cluster. And if I can figure that out, anybody listening to this can figure that out. So
So is this a job interview
it's not a
for
job interview.
Scott? For
Sorry.
Scott?
Sorry.
For Scott to
Um,
come to NVIDIA? No, no, no. You did it awesome, man. Like
if
you described the process inside out.
I were
100%.
looking for a job, we would be talking. We would be talking, but I love what I get to do here in conversations
That's
exactly
beautiful.
like this. So look, there's so much to dive into there. And back on the YouTube comment, I pay for YouTube Premium so I can listen to stuff even when my phone screen locks, or I can listen to it while I drive between New Jersey and Virginia.
Makes
Because I'm not going
sense.
to watch it while I drive. But the the NVIDIA training content and related training content that's all over YouTube is super. And I've done partner training material on the NVIDIA portal too, also extremely useful. There's nothing in here that people can't apprehend and figure out. If you've got a background in networking, it's just a matter of associating concepts, and it's fun. You probably won't ever. You might not be a person that's ever going to do anything with InfiniBand, but it's really interesting to dive into. So.
100%. And I shouldn't be dropping names here, but since we
Why
talked about
start?
YouTube,
Why stop now? Yeah.
Why stop now? 100%. So another place would probably be a GTC. So NVIDIA has these.
Yeah.
I think it's 3 times a year globally GTC summits.
Yeah.
And a lot of GTC content is actually posted on YouTube. And if you want to learn AI architecture, back end, front end, from the application stack perspective, going all the way down to networking, you'll find it in GTC.
Yep. I would, so I got to go to my first GTC this year, 2025. And I think the biggest challenge is figuring out what you want to sit in on. I think you need AI just to make the best selections of content for your preferences. It's overwhelming. Like forget about AWS, reInvent or the AWS summits. This is, I want to say 10x. I'm sure it's not 10x the content, but there's so much more to dive into, whether it's about infrastructure or whether it's about many, many applications in different verticals and industries. Really incredible coverage at GTC. So,
don't disagree with you. You probably have to take a pre-course class before you attend some of these topics.
Exactly.
And speeches.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, let me wind this back to, you having been on multiple sides of the aisle here. You've run a network, you've worked for vendors, and now you're running a really important network again. And the things that resonate with you when you've been in customer-facing SE and SE leadership roles, right? How customers communicate what they need, right? And now you're back on that side of the aisle. You're the one communicating what you need to certain vendors, or even your own internal products. What life lessons does Senad have on how to effectively communicate those from a customer side of the house to get vendors to deliver what you need?
Oh, okay. This is good one. So this is what I'm going to quote my dear friend Paul Ubenhagen, who was my last boss. So I mean, psychology is everything. It has, a lot of things has to do with patience. When I compare, how I had to deal with the customers when I was the vendor, right? We had to have patience. We had to have composure. We had to speak eloquently, whether it's right or wrong. We had to agree and move forward, right? So what I found is that for folks who grew up in single company forever, they typically don't have that composure. They don't have empathy when they speak. Like it's just like it's my thought. It's just like some backfiring back and forth, just from the hose. So Paul always used to say, you solve things with honey. Carrot is always better than a stick, right?
Yeah.
Because we all want more of carrots. We want more of honey. Stick goes only so far. As long as you're jailed through some means, whether it's money or H-1B visa or something like that, you'll take the stick, but there's always a price for freedom, and sometimes that price is actually freedom is priceless. So I'd say regardless which side of the aisle you are, you gotta treat everybody like you want to be treated. Don't
Sure.
overuse the power. Life is short. Nobody would
Yep.
tolerate abuse, because I've, again, being on both sides. So in my world now, when I deal with vendors, I don't like to use the power there. Go with the honey. We
Sure.
are how the your typical win-win situation, right? We all benefit from this relationship. You solve my problem, it goes a long way. I solve your problem, it goes a long way. Net benefit for both. I
Yeah.
think that's probably something I would. This is sort of a lesson learned in anything.
Sure. No, that's great wisdom. And I would even emphasize that with, many people have stories about how they've been burned by vendors or how they think they've been burned by vendors. It almost doesn't matter, perception or reality. But the impulse there is to be vengeful and punish the vendor. You know, what I hear you saying is find a way to achieve a win-win with the carrot, with honey. Don't put honey on the carrot. Um, pick one or the other, but find constructive
Okay.
ways to communicate what you really need to your vendor partners, and they'll appreciate it, right? And they'll be more highly incentivized to work with you to find solutions.
100%. I think in this case, probably what you want to make sure is that transparency, full transparency across the board, right?
Sure.
Because what you don't want, and I guess now this is more advice for the vendors in general, right? And I'm sure you have been burned with this many times, is when they overstretch what they can deliver when it comes to ER and features
Sure.
and things
Yep.
like this, right? If you can't make something in a timeline, be transparent. Let's work on it together to figure out what is the workaround for this entire problem
Yeah.
statement,
Yeah.
versus dragging it, and then later on not being delivered. Then there's no win for anybody in this case.
Yeah.
So I think transparency when it comes to relationships is a big deal here.
Yeah. I think there's a something that came to mind for me too in this conversation on the SE side of the house. As a direct line SE or an SE leader, I do think there's a little bit of a difference between systems engineers and salespeople in that SEs relate to what they're selling in a way that's much more highly connected, I think, than most salespeople. And like we take it personally, or we're personally embarrassed when the product doesn't deliver in a very direct way. And the worst thing that can happen for an SE that's staked their reputation on delivering a feature on time with quality, to be told by the product house, yeah, we decided to delay that, or we decided to cancel that. It's another place where you could have empathy for your SEs. So,
I totally agree with you. No,
yeah.
no, on the same page here.
Well, we're going to start winding this down, but I've got a couple other big questions for you as we go out. Do you have any other big lessons learned either from previous phases or current phase in network operations? Like, what are you doing differently now in an ops engineering architecture role that you wouldn't have done 20 years ago?
Okay, let me think. Where did you start your career? I forgot.
I started my
I,
career with the U.S. government.
U.S.
Um,
government.
yep. So,
Okay, that's probably even better. So I think I alluded to this. I really started with Juniper Tech, right? And
sure.
the big part of that was going through logs and logs analysis, right? What happened before, what happened after, and trying to figure out. So irrespectively what changes in industry, you have to know your network fundamentals. You
Sure.
really have to know your network fundamentals. You have to know your OSI layer. You have to know how things stack up together, right? Your protocols, your message
Yep.
types, what comes before, what comes after, your TCP flags, UDP flags, your now nickel, right?
Yep.
And then on top of it, because world has evolved, right, you gotta know your scripting. I don't know if you
Yep.
still remember your awk and sed, but
Oh, absolutely.
something
Yep.
show grab, right?
Yep.
So these pieces. So now if I fast forward, we're in a world of vibe coding. So a lot of things,
Yep.
get sort of abstracted. You can speak in our language, but net of it, you still have to be able to ask the right questions. And
Yeah.
for you to be able to ask the right questions, you have to know your stuff inside out. So if I were to say, because lessons in NetOps, to make a solid NetOps engineer or leader or organization itself, right? You have to be fluid across all of the ecosystem. In this case, networking, the software knowledge, that automation that makes it happen,
Right.
right? And then in the same token, what value to the business we bring as an org, how to make it
Sure.
fluid. I think days of when network is just a support infrastructure and can go down. I still remember my first job in JTAC, and our friend, we both know him. I'm not going to mention his name, but he was bringing up peerings in the middle of the day, changing route reflectors left and right, and he was working for a service provider, and it was totally okay to do so, right? Many years
Right.
ago.
Right.
Now world is different, right? Those things cost money. So um, net of it, I think anything we do in a NetOps is far more valuable than what used to be before, and we just have to take it as that.
If I were to try to paraphrase or summarize what you said, knowing your fundamentals is critical, but the bar on the fundamentals has raised. It's not spanning tree and just peering anymore, right? It's what's everything's going on in scripting, what's happening in adjacent technology areas. And I talk about being a next gen network engineer, and that fits exactly with the model I'm trying to promote there. So
Thank you. You capture it properly.
cool.
It takes the entire stack.
Okay, now, Senad, take out your crystal ball, make sure it has fresh batteries, and what are the next big things coming to automation and NetOps from AI? Like, what's the next year look like for us?
Hmm. So I would say, so maybe maybe let me think. So it might be
Feel
controversial, depends what your background is and how adaptive you are to change. But I actually think that vibe coding is phenomenal.
Yeah,
It's the biggest thing ever. If you look at, so even from the NetOps, like troubleshooting perspective, like you have the tools to do things, but a lot of times, especially when it comes to automation, in this case, like if you need to scrape something from a node, you have to, run. If you need to, like, look at the BGP peer and bunch of events that are associated with that from the logs and whatnot. Now you can just go and take your cursor and say, wipe code to use Paramiko library to go into these nodes, get the
yep,
data out, parse the logs, and tell you what's happening, right?
yep,
So I think uh, no, like using the tools that are in front of you. In this case, wipe coding would probably be the thing you want to play as much as you can with. The MCP as a technology, it's there. It's getting a lot of heat. It's becoming a hit. Um, I mean, we've internally built a lot of tooling around MCP.
sure,
So I know it's a hype. Not everything will land on MCP.
sure,
I think there's some merit to it claim because it allows LLM to run things and go
yep,
forward through it like a route reflector or something. So I think sort of bottom line is like so LLMs and AI are not bulletproof, right? It
sure,
hallucinates, right?
right,
So as long as it hallucinates, MTP uptake is going to be slow. But the
okay,
moment we solve the hallucination problem, and there are ways to solve the hallucination completely.
right,
And if my talk for NAV gets accepted, I'll go into detail on how to solve that problem. But if once you solve that problem, then I think MCP uptake will be significant because we'll end up using a lot of servers across the board, and we'll just interacting with some sort of LLMs in the backend.
sure. So on the vibe coding front, I have a confession to make. Um, when I first heard the term, my eyes just rolled in the back of my head. This is complete hype. I can't believe this. But but I had an aha moment. As engineers, there's something that engineers have been doing for decades. And I'll use an example with my grandfather, Norwegian immigrant to the US, has 10 patents on power tools, handheld power tools for Porter Cable and Rockwell. And I have prototypes of things that he was making before they ever went into production. Prototypes that are older than I am. But engineers make prototypes to prove out concepts. They're not production ready. They're not fully functional. They're not fully secured. And that is all okay, because that's not what they're for. But now I have this ability to go from idea to prototype very quickly, and in some instances without writing any code, right? And vibe coding is the instantiation of our entry into the age of ideas. Like, we're moving from the age of engineering to the age of ideas, where it's so much easier to get an idea in my head into some working software environment. And that's just amazing, right? So that's me agreeing with you, Senad, on the vibe coding part.
100%. I didn't know about your grandfather, so that's amazing story. But yeah, agree. 100%.
Well, this has been super fun. I do have one last fun question that no one gets away with avoiding. You've been in network ops in at least 2 segments of your career. You don't do this without having caused an outage. What's the worst or most interesting outage you've ever caused? And if you can't own up to that publicly, what's the most interesting outage you're aware of that you may or may not have had a role in?
Wow, this is a good one. I think, when I think about it, let me think. Most of the folks are gone by now from that spot, so I think I can actually say it publicly.
All right.
So I brought down Bloomberg's network.
Awesome.
Very long time ago, and I think nobody even knows about it. I was working with a firewall guy, and it was like 11 p.m. or something, and we black holed half of the prefixes, and it took us like 2 hours to figure things out, and then eventually we got it back, and it was all good. But I think this is like an official public confession.
No, look, you don't. I've only had like one person say, I've never really caused an outage, and I'm not sure I really believe that individual.
Yeah, me neither.
But that's okay. That's
I
okay.
Don't believe them, yeah.
That's okay. I'm not gonna prosecute the case. But you're an officer and a gentleman for standing up to it. Senad, do you want to point people to anything that you publish from a blog perspective, or just keeping in touch with you?
I guess so. I actually don't write blogs. I used to do a lot of things on LinkedIn. I guess maybe just follow me on LinkedIn, and
Sure.
I'll update it for sure. I'm bad at it, but yes. So I did in the past. So let's make a commitment, right? Going forward, that I'll do things properly on LinkedIn. I think if you want to keep in touch with me, reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's definitely, I'm up to date with that. Note for everybody would be, I think, always try to stay ahead of the curve. It gives you a leg up in your work environment. You see typically where the puck is going versus where it is today, and you can adjust yourself at the time you spend at work, making yourself more useful than you would be otherwise going forward.
Awesome nuggets of wisdom for all of us. Senad, thanks so much for being with us today. Great to have you here. Great to catch up with you. So,
thank you, Scott. Likewise, enjoyed every bit of it.
And to all our listeners, thank you so much for spending your time with us on Total Network Operations. We'd love to hear your feedback. If you have nominations for topics or future guests, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can hit me there as well, or send us feedback to packetpushers.net/follow-up. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on Total Network Operations.